Back on the Charles River, set for our first Radcliffe heavyweights race of the day. The Harvard Radcliffe women will race in the V4B against the Yale heavyweight women. So your Harvard-Yale rivalry playing out. As we get further along in the day, the Harvard-Yale rivalry will also add a very competitive University of Southern California team to the mix. So if Harvard-Yale wasn't enough, you take a team that's been a national contender in past seasons, and it should be a big day for these three teams trying to measure themselves, moving closer to their conference and the national championships.
Of course, and these women are going to remember the results of all of their Yale races, I'll tell you that.
He's Eric Schultz. I'm Bill Spaulding. Eric spent time for 4 years on the Harvard lightweight men's rowing team, where he was the captain in 2013. Let's run you through the lineups for the varsity 4B boats for Radcliffe and for Yale. For Harvard Radcliffe, the coxswain is sophomore Jenny Lee. Freshman Elizabeth Rowe is the stroke. Junior Catherine Playfair sits in seat 3. Freshman Sarah Tisdall is in seat 2. And the bow is freshman Mirabelle Levine. Meanwhile, for the Bulldogs of Yale, their second varsity 4 is coxswained by Izzy Dirthage, a freshman from Zionsville, Indiana. Stroke Sarah Locke is a senior, one of 2 seniors in the boat for Yale in the second varsity 4. She's joined by senior Emily Patton in seat 3. Then it's freshman Elizabeth DeZurich from seat 2. She's from Arlington, Massachusetts, so likely very familiar with rowing here on the Charles River. And the bow is freshman Margot Paradis, who's made the trip across country from San Francisco, California. Yale was 3rd at the Ivy League Championships last year, and the varsity 4B boats do race and gain points at the Ivy League Championships. So it's an important discipline to have some depth in, knowing that there are valuable Ivy League points on the line in a few weeks when they get together for one of their most important races of the year.
Absolutely, and this is going to be a great test, especially on the home course for the Radcliffe women, and for the Yale women. It's always it's always that much harder to be on the Charles.
Conditions today are really as good as you could hope for. Sure, it was 15 degrees warmer last week, but this time of year, you never know what you're going to get. As they're underway in the varsity 4B race, Radcliffe racing against Yale. You know, some days you get 40 degrees, 20-mile-an-hour headwinds or white-capped waves. So today we've got a slight tailwind, which helps the time, and we've got pretty calm waters.
Well, as an athlete, you learn to love both situations, but I think the calm days is when you really get to test yourself against the other boat and see how you stack up.
Radcliffe and Yale in the varsity 4B. So Radcliffe trying to separate over the first 500 meters. How important are these early strokes?
Of course, it's always great to jump out to a little lead. However, once Radcliffe settles in, you hope that they'll be able to hold on in their base rhythm a little better than they are now. Yale obviously had so much power coming out of the gates, so you would hope for Radcliffe's sake that they can settle into a base rhythm that holds on a little better. But you gotta like the way the Yale women are rowing at this point.
Yale has the lead. Hard to tell if you're just watching on the screen who's who here. Very close colors. Yale's navy blue and white, and Radcliffe's black and white on a gray morning. But Yale has the separation here over the first few strokes, leading now by open water. Yeah, this Bulldog team, you see this a lot at this type of level. They have a good mix of experience and veterans who've been in these boats for 4 years working hard, and freshmen who maybe are shooting for some higher boats down the road but still learning at the college level. 2 freshmen, 2 seniors to work together in this Yale 4.
Such a great setup when you can put experienced rowers like that with the younger women and really bring them along to a point where they're ready to be in the top boats later on.
Conditions-wise, it's especially brutal for the 4s when conditions are bad. So there you got to think extra happy to have the smoother water and not be trying to stroke through white caps in a 4 instead of an 8.
Absolutely, and those coxswains sit so low in the bows of those 4s. You think they're happy to be nice and dry.
Lead for Yale, and the Bulldogs have stretched it out to open water, probably a 2-length lead right now for Yale.
Yeah, this is a really good showing for them at this point. You can see their blades are going to the water pretty nicely. You can see really good power, especially coming from that stroke seat. I would expect this lead to grow a little bit over the next 1,000 meters.
Radcliffe coming in against a a race last week where they were up in Saratoga Springs to take on Syracuse and Dartmouth. Radcliffe beat Dartmouth in every race, fell to Syracuse in every race except for fourth varsity, which Radcliffe took the victory against both Dartmouth and Syracuse. Yale last week won 4 of its 5 races versus Princeton, including the varsity 4 race, but they did lose at first varsity to the Tigers, so the Tigers took the overall head-to-head win in the Cup last week against the Bulldogs of Yale. It does tell you that Yale has good depth down the roster, that they were so effective from their varsity 4 up through their JV last week.
Absolutely.
Of course, they're used to competing sometimes on a river that can be choppy from time to time down in Connecticut. Never the easiest conditions down in Connecticut when Harvard and Yale get together down there.
No, and both rivers are so epic. You get some racing
Yep.
that can definitely be interesting and engaging for spectators because there's so many dynamics that both boats have to deal with.
We head under the bridge with Yale leading Harvard Radcliffe, the black and white of Harvard Radcliffe, in their first race of 5 today. We will also show you the third varsity Radcliffe race, which comes your way at 7:50, and then the Radcliffe first varsity race at 9:20. In between those races, we'll intersperse a Harvard lightweight men's race, and then later on in the day, our coverage will cap off with the Radcliffe lightweight rowing races against Princeton. Through the first 4 minutes and 15 seconds unofficially, and the lead is still large for Yale. At this point, 2.5, maybe 3 lengths. They've slowly inched their way out from the start with a steady pace that has just allowed them with each stroke to gain a little bit of ground.
And you know, after their showing last week and with the racing they have coming up, they're not letting up at all. They're trying to see what kind of margin they can put up. And these Radcliffe women as well, they're going to be both looking at these margins at the end to see how they stack up against other boats in the league.
Coming toward the MIT Boathouse, about 700 meters to go at this point, and Yale continuing to stroke it out. When you have a lead like this, and similarly when you're behind by a margin like this, what's the mental game you're playing to get through the final 500 or 600 meters when you're already feeling that fatigue?
You always have things that you need to think about and you need to work on, especially when you're behind in this situation. It's difficult to stay focused on rowing well and rowing fast. But the reality is you need to continue to test yourself and continue to see where your boat is for this point in the year. And I think all the other teams are going online, they're looking at these results, they're looking at the margins, and you don't want to be putting up losses that are bigger than you should. So you have to stay focused, you have to keep rowing well, even though it's difficult when there's a margin like this.
And obviously in a sport where the conditions can change the results so much, the margins are the important thing you look at. But hey, if you're trying to put a time out there that could scare people, today is a day to do that when you have the tailwind behind you once you get to the varsity level today. Lead for Yale is still about 3 lengths. They have about 400 meters to go toward the finishing stretch on the banks of the Charles River. Temperature around 45 degrees today, overcast skies. This is the first of 2 days of racing this weekend for the Radcliffe heavyweight team. They're taking on Yale and also USC today. Tomorrow they'll take on Michigan State and Boston College. Michigan State is also on the water today. Michigan State taking on Northeastern and Boston University on the Charles River today. Always a busy day on a Saturday in April on the Charles. Generally can get 8 to 10 schools, 3 different races going on, and an overlap for maybe 4 hours. There'll be college crews on the water till close to 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's the best. You can see here the Yale women are still pushing out a little bit.
Very quiet, not leaving much of a splash or staying pretty low and steady to the ground as well with their boats, not bouncing around very much.
Yeah, they look good. You see the bucket here in Radcliffe's boat. You've got the same 2 and 3 seat rowing on the same side, bow and stroke rowing on the same side. A lot of times that kind of arrangement can help create better rhythm.
Yale coming up toward the flag. Time has ticked to 7 minutes and 15 seconds and still counting unofficially as the Bulldogs are going to take the first race of the day against Harvard Radcliffe. At the line, Yale comes home in 7:29.4 unofficially. So the Bulldogs win the V4B. Harvard Radcliffe trying to finish things off. And they make it across in 7:43 unofficially, so a double-digit second margin win for Yale at the varsity 4B level. Take a break. When we come back, we'll have the Radcliffe third varsity race. That's a 7:50 start, so you have time to get up, get some coffee, wake yourself up a little bit this morning. You're in for the long haul, 3.5 hours of rowing. Stay with us here on the Ivy League Digital Network.